start?
Yep. Hello, welcome to the TEAS working group in London. Good to see everyone here physically and virtually. Appreciate everyone's participation. I'm Lou Berger. This is Pavan Biram, my co-chair. We also have Luis Contreras here as our secretary. Again, great to be here in person and great to have everyone online. This is the IETF Note Well. We have a process that covers participation, and basically everything you say here becomes part of our permanent record and is a contribution to the IETF. If you're familiar with this, great. If you're not, please take a look at that URL off of the main IETF page and familiarize yourself with our processes and policies. The IETF also has a code of conduct, which talks about how we should interact with each other. Basically, it's saying be professional, be courteous. It's okay to have good and maybe even a little heated discussion, but keep it technical. And please always treat each other with respect. And of course, we have a document, BCP 54, governing this. For this meeting, we have both on-site and remote participants. We are going to try very hard to keep the playing field level between both, and so each can participate equally. Part of that is if you're in the room, if you're on-site, we use the on-site tool to control our participation. Specifically, if you're going to go to the mic, we really ask that you use the tool and join the queue just like any other remote participant. It's also how we identify who's been in the room, and this is also important. This is our virtual blue sheets, so everyone in the room we ask to scan the QR code and jump on the tool. If we do decide to talk about adoption or anything on the procedural side, we will do polling through this tool, and that will be, we're not going to raise hands like we used to or hum. We're going to use the tool. So it really is important if you want to fully participate in this meeting to scan the code and jump on. The other thing on the slide, we've been asked to remind people, the policy of this meeting is wear a mask. So please wear a mask fully, completely. There's masks in the front if you need one. The exception to this is that if you're at the front speaking, you can optionally remove the mask. You don't need to. We're wearing ours. You can wear yours. It's up to you. Remote participants, you're here. That's great. So you've done the hard part. We do ask that if you're not speaking to mute your mics. And that includes if you're presenting, sometimes echo is introduced by remote participants. So if you're taking questions, just mute yourself during the Q&A period. I think we've talked about most of this, except I didn't mention that we have our joint note-taking going on as well. If you look in the chat session on MeetEcho, you'll see a link to our note-taking page. And please join us there and help make sure your comments are appropriately captured, or comments of your colleagues are also represented. We have a pretty packed agenda. We don't expect any changes. The one thing I'll mention is we actually have two sessions. So we have they're back to back, but because of the way MeetEcho operates, we will be taking a break between the sessions. We have an incoming liaison actually we have multiple liaisons. We have one that's pretty interesting. It talks about gaps that the ETSI folks would like to see addressed, and by the work in the different working groups. We think that this is definitely worth reviewing. And the way we have done liaisons in the past is we take proposals from the group. You know, we're contribution driven here, and then curate what comes in from the group and then send a formal response. we think that's appropriate here as well. Loa, I see you're in queue.
No, Loa. I'm unmuted. Okay. I actually, on the liaison from study group 15, I talked to Scott Mansfield, and if I understood him correctly, he was agreeing to coordinate the response to that. So all the working groups listed should give him the input, and he send the liaison.
That's great.
I don't know if Scott's in the room, so he can confirm.
I don't know if he's online. I know he was in the last meeting I was in. I don't see him. I think that's wonderful. And if he's in the queue. Oh, Scott is in the queue. Okay. So let's hear from Scott.
Yes, thanks. I was just waiting for my microphone to become hot. So thanks, Loa. Yeah, he beat me to it. You were talking about the Etsy one. I was going to wait to make that point. So if anyone has anything they want to do or update to the OTNT standardization plan or want to know what it is out of those groups, just send me an email and we can work on that one through email. Thanks.
All right, that's great. And typically we have done those responses. I think CCAMP has taken the lead. I think, whichever group you want to run it in, that's good. But please advise the other groups which group we'll be focusing the discussion on. And until then, just keep all the 4 groups coordinated. Thank you. Appreciate it. We are all familiar with working remote. This is just a reminder that you have working group resources available to you. If you would like to start having informal public meetings like we do on certain topics, and we also can schedule interims as is appropriate based on working group interest. We have a formal process at this point. This is pretty old, so I don't think we need to talk about it. And something new that has come up from the routing ADs, and you want to say something?
If you want me to, I will.
No, you don't need it.
Your slide's fine.
Okay, great, thanks. So the routing ADs have asked to change the timing of routing directorate reviews. So in the past, routing directorate reviews were done during IETF last call. The request is that we perform it before submitting the documents to the ISG. In general, we will do that along with working group last call, but sometimes it might be after, particularly because we're catching up to the new process. Anything else you want to add? Okay. So we just want the working group to be aware of this change. And with that, I think we're ready to go on to the detailed document status, which Pavan will be doing.
Okay. Good afternoon. Next on the agenda is the working group document status. Next slide. There are 25 working group documents listed on the slide. We have one document, the RSC 3272 BIS document, for which we put in a publication request. There are 3 documents colored in yellow or gold, for which we have initiated the working group last call process. There are 3 documents colored in blue that are on the agenda today. So that leaves us with 18 documents. The status of each of these 18 documents is part of this slide deck. I will not be walking through the status of each and every one of those in this session. Like always, I will double click on a select few and select few that we believe need some immediate attention and dwell on those. For the rest of them, you can walk through the slides at your own pace and ask questions if any. You can also check the history of each of these documents in the data tracker to fetch the current status. We have been fairly conscious about keeping this current and up to date. So please make use of that as well. Can we jump to slide 4? This is the ACTN POI applicability document. There was a comment from the chairs earlier about adopting a technology agnostic approach for describing the various use cases that are discussed in this document. There was a question on how to go about doing this. There was some clarification given offline to the authors yesterday, and I believe the authors have agreed to make the relevant changes in the next revision. Let's go to slide 5. This is the ACTN VN Yang document. The authors have stated that this document is ready for last call. So we'd like to request the working group to review this in anticipation of an upcoming last call. If there are any questions or concerns, please do reach out to the authors on the list. The next document that we would like to draw your attention to is on slide 10. This is the PCECC use cases document. We did conduct an early routing directorate review for this. There were some comments that came out of this. There was a revision that was published yesterday, I believe, addressing some, if not all, of the comments that were raised. We would like to request the authors to close the loop on this with the reviewer, Mac Chen, and we'll take it to the next stage after that. Let's skip to slide 15. This is the Yang path computation document. We took revision 18 of this document through working group last call. There were several comments that came in during the working group last call. Most of them have been discussed on the list, and the proposals for addressing those have also been articulated on the list. As part of this exercise, some of the groupings and identities were moved to the IETF types document. The IETF types update document is on the agenda today, and Italo would be elaborating a bit more on that. So the plan for this document is to take it through a second last call along with the IETF types update document. The next document we'd like to draw your attention to is on slide 19, if I'm not right, if I'm not wrong. Okay, this is the Yang T document. The status of this is quite similar to that of the previous document. Most of the comments that were raised during the working group last call have been addressed. Again, there were some reusable identities that were moved to the TE types update document. So the plan again is to move this through a second last call along with the TE types update document. Those are the documents that we wanted to draw your attention to. Are there any questions on any of the working group documents? Thank you.
Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Italo Guse. I'm presenting the updates for the T types. Okay. Next slide, please, on behalf of co-authors and contributors. Okay, what is the background of the work is that we have identified the need to update the IETF T types YAM module, which has been published in 776, and we have a new definitions in terms of identities, groupings, and type defs, which have been taken from the IETF and the IETF path computation YAM modules, which are in working group last call. Some of them were identified before and some others were identified during the working group last call common resolution. And based on that, with respect to the previous version, what we noticed that the scope is a little bit larger than before. At the beginning, we were addressing just tiny updates, one identity, one grouping, and one type def, and now we have a little bit more identities, but the changes are still small compared to the whole A776, and the work that we are doing here is mainly moving and aligning definitions which are already in documents, which are in working group last call, and the changes are based on the working group last call resolutions. Thank you. The next slide, sorry. What we changed, okay, we had some discussion in the previous meetings about how to move forward with so smaller changes, and the suggestion we got in the last plenary was, in the last IETF, was to format this as a BIS with some editor's note to indicate what has been changed. What we did in this version, we formatted the document as a BIS, but we didn't copy all the text from the existing RFC. But we just put some editor's note about where this existing text has to be moved, and the plan is to resolve this editor's note before the working group last call. We got some comment during the adoption to have some appendices describing the process, why we decided this process. So we added this appendix. And in this appendix, we also reference some new process that has been proposed in networking group in the last IETF, which may be another way to move forward on this draft. And we have also added, this appendix is temporary, it's just for helping people reviewing this draft while progressing, but the intention is to remove it from the RFC. And we have also added something for the young model diffs. Somebody thought that a diff may help to understand the few changes that we are proposing. And also this appendix is intended to be removed from the RFC just to help the reviewers. And we do some changes based on the working group plus core common resolution. So we moved some identities from the IETF and IETF computation, and we added a new set of identities for the SVEC objective functions, because we identified that the objective function in the current RSC are more for PAT than for SVEC. And we also noticed some mistakes that have been done, some SVEC objective function which were should be under the new identity other than the new one. And we got some comment from Ayana, and we fixed the Ayana sections accordingly. Next, please. Okay, so for the process, the reason why we did that, the editor's note is because we have two options at this moment in time. One is to keep working as an RFC bis. And basically what we need to do is, with some notes where describe what has been changed, so to help people reviewing only what we changed rather than what has been already discussed and agreed a few years ago. And the second option is to follow the new process that is under discussion in networking group. The only problem is that this process has been presented, but there is no clear definition, so it's not yet fully defined, so it's difficult to follow it at this moment in time. So the proposal now is to be a little bit opportunistic, so to keep working as a BIS, and as soon as we are ready for working group plus call, we can address the editor's note and move forward as a BIS. Or if as soon as if the new ID, the describe the new process is ready before the working group plus call of this draft, we can think to move to the new process. Whatever is coming first, we can follow. That's the proposal on how to move forward on this document. And next one.
Are you looking for a discussion on this now or at the end?
As you like. Okay, also now, any comments?
No, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, it's okay. No, it's okay. Comment on the proposal?
Well, I wear a couple of hats here, probably too many, but I also chair NetMod. There is no new process. There was an idea saying it would be good if we had a new process. We don't even have anything formal on that. So pretend that doesn't exist, because in reality, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I think you only have one option.
Yeah, okay. So we proceed with a piece. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, we have two major outstanding comments from each other that was raised during the adoption. One is about being able to have a union, to have a different type of identifiers from node links and termination points. For example, we have a node ID is a URI and node ID is a dotted quad. And the proposal raised on the list is to update the key types to make a union between a dotted quad and a URI. And the second issue is feedback we got on using a binary as a TTP identifier. And again, the proposal is to change it as a union between a binary and a URI. These two comments are planned to be discussed during the weekly call we are having on Friday. But of course, any feedbacks from the mailing list and this meeting are more than welcome. We discussed it, we presented this last time, but we didn't have any further discussion. But these are two comments we are taking into account in the progress of this meeting, of this draft. Again, if any comment on these issues, welcome. Okay, next slide. So what are the next steps is, okay, we have the new other definitions, but we don't have text that describe this part of the yarn. So we can complete this editorial work to be done. We will keep updating this draft based on the ongoing working group plus call on T-tunnel and pack computation. And so we will keep in sync with the other two documents. We can address any other comments we can receive from the working group, more than welcome. And we think we maybe consider this working group plus call this document together with the T and pack computation IDs, so we don't have any blocking points to move forward these other two documents. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Luis?
So hello everyone. I will present the draft on use cases, the status of this draft on behalf of my co-authors. So next, please. So as a reminder, the motivation of this draft was the following. At the beginning, in the working group, we started to develop the framework document and the MBI jam model and so, but was not a detailed view on the use cases and the needs, the attributes, or the procedures that we would need to be supported in the network slice controller and all the slicing stuff. So we started to work on this document in order to collect all these use cases, because the idea that we have is once we have network slicing capabilities in the network to be used in a generalized way, not only for few use cases. So, I mean, not only for 5G, for instance. So the idea would be to try to be comprehensive and trying to understand what could be the needs for solving different use cases. So with that in mind, we started to work on detailing the use cases, trying to cover that gap, and with that, feeding, let's say, the other documents in the working group. We already presented this in IETF109 and IETF111, sorry, and the draft was adopted before Philadelphia meeting, before the previous one. So yeah, we have provided some updates in this version. Next, please. So the use cases documented before the adoption was the list that you can check there, the 5G services, the NFV-based services, network sharing, SD1, and the radio functional splits. We took all of them in order to derive from them, again, attributes, SLOs, and procedures that could be required to be supported by the network slice controller. Next, please. So the updates from the adoption said that the document was adopted before Philadelphia meeting. We generated 0.0 version just during the Philadelphia meeting, but we didn't went forward in the content. So we had in this version took the two different directions. One, to progress on the technical content, and the second, to address the comments received during the adoption. The major contribution in this 0.1 version is about the comments being that were received, and we have added some small technical content. But anyway, this version could be seen or should be seen as an intermediate version. We need to finalize the addressing all of the comments and for sure complete the technical work. So yeah, consider this as an intermediate version. Next, please. So going into the progress on the technical aspects, we have starting to draft the use case of the data center interconnection. So there were some initial ideas that we need to elaborate further, but at least there is somehow the high level view, the high level lines of what we intend to report in this use case. We also added a new section regarding the gaps with respect to other IETF network slice efforts. This was coming from one of the comments received, and is actually relevant to have a summary of the different gaps that we could identify as a consequence of elaborating on the attributes as SLOs of the different use cases, for sure. And then, certainly needed as well the alignment with the framework document terminology. There was some misalignment, and this has been tried to be fixed in this version. Even on the title was referencing the MBI, and we received a comment from Adrian with the idea of changing MBI by network services slice interface. So we also fixed this in the title of the document. As to do for the next version, the idea is to complete the data center interconnection use case. So from that work, let's say, to elicit the requirements that could be derived from this use case, there's laws, attributes, so on and so far, the procedures and so on. Then to complete the section 5 about the summary of attributes and procedures, we have now some summary in this respect, but there are missing parts. For instance, the SLA, the service level expectations is not complete. So the idea is to complete that part as well. And yeah, for sure, whatever other further technical aspect that could not be present yet in the document, and the working group consider as necessary to be documented there. Next, please. Regarding the comments received, we received a lot of comments during the adoption phase, so thanks all the working group for them. We started to addressing them gradually, so we were not able to have all of them addressed in time. I have added a number of backup slides with the different detailed comments received, marking in green those that we consider has been addressed in the current version, and keeping on black those that has not been yet addressed. So this can be checked by your own. The idea would be, for sure, a part of including or trying to address this in the document to answer the received comments one by one. So this is also something pending from our side to do the proper answer to the comments received. I mean, answer via email, So for the version 02, what we expect is to complete the review of the comments, to provide the proper answer to all of you that provided those comments, and iterate on the ones that probably could not be easily resolved or that we could have a different view. So essentially going to next IETF with all the comments received addressed as much as we can. Next, please. So as next steps, we want to complete the work in progress, the data center interconnection use case, the gaps on the related, with respect to the related IETF network slice efforts, so the framework, the NVIDIA model, and so, and complete the summary section. So yeah, that could be essentially the input for those other works in TEAS. The idea would be if as well, if needed, or if the working group consider necessary to include some other relevant cases to document them as well. Yeah, if there is something that you consider that is necessary to take into account. And finally, to collect feedback and the comments from the working group one more time, prepare a new version for next IETF with all the comments received being addressed, hopefully. So that's all from my side, I guess.
Any comments? Thanks for the progress. I do see that you tried to fix the title. It's still a bit verbose. Maybe you could simplify it, just call it IETF network slice use cases and service attributes and leave it at that.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reza Rukui from Siena. On behalf of my co-authors and contributors, I'm going to give you the status of the NBI Yang model for IETF network slice services. Next slide, please. A short summary of release 3 of the document. We have a weekly meeting, and during that weekly meeting, we go through all the issues that we have, open issues, we go through all, and I'm glad to say that we more or less closed majority of the issues. In very specific, these 6 items that you will see here, and more or less self-explanatory, are the coverage that we did as a very high level in release 3. The first item is the concept of the policy override. SLO, SLE, we have a policy, but if customer wants to change that policy, whether or not it wants to replace the entire policy or some item of the policy, we introduce full or partial override to allow that. Basically, it's giving the flexibility to the northbound to request a specific IETF network slice service with a specific characteristic that they want. The second one is we are improving the SLO, SLE template again, that we are having some enhancement from that area. Number 3 is something that I'm going to talk about that one in detail in the next slide, but the idea of the SAP ID that we added, or peer SAP ID, SAP stands for Service Access Point. We took that idea from the introduction of this in a framework, and based on the request from Ryan from TELUS, we realized that there is something missing. So I'm going to go through this one in more detail in the next slide, but suffice to say that the whole idea in most cases is applicable to CE-based slicing when your service, the STP demarcation point is on the CE side. And the prime example of that one is the 5G. So we go through that, and there is some question that we want to ask. We took the idea of the SAP, and we are introducing, and we call it peer SAP. The next one, number 4, is there was some discussion even in the previous IETF that how we can introduce some custom topology. I'm, as a customer, want to create an IETF network slice, but I have a specific topology. I want to refer to that one as well. I want to give more flexibility. We are referring that, again, there are some questions whether or not we have to use TE topology, because when we say TE means specific to some realization, is not the technology agnostic. So there are some questions on that one as well. We introduce a group of examples that are very good. I'm encouraging you to go through those examples: CE-based, PE-based, multiplicity, and as you know, lots of characteristic of the model that we have, lots of attributes are optional. So we went through the example to give a perspective of various type of the examples. And last but not least, a group of improvement. So you will see 26 issues closed, 4 are open. So as I said, we are more or less ready to go to the last call. We will talk about that. But I'm encouraging you to take a look at the GitHub that we have. If there is any issue that you think is not addressed properly, please refer to us. And from that aspect, I'm going to, for the next few slides, going through those 4 issues. Some of them we still want to ask whether or not the way that we do is correct or not, or there is room for improvement. So next slide, please. Before going through 4 issues, the concept of SAP. The concept of SAP is introduced as a service access point and is mainly technology specific. The idea that we have, let's just take a look at the picture here. I want to create an end-to-end, an IETF network slice A from CE1 to CE2. From CE1 and CE2, the topology is a black box, or should be a black box. You don't want, as an operator, to expose the guts of your network to CE1 or CE2. From that aspect, if a customer wants to create network slice from SDP1 to SDP2, which residing on 2 CEs, how we can give information of the network in such a way that it's a kind of generic. At the same time, we are not revealing operators' network. This is the idea of the SAP and how we want to do it. Again, the prime example of that, thanks to Ryan, he is implementing this one in his network, and he raised that. And the idea of here is similar to AWS. When, as a customer, you are requesting a service, you are getting a specific ID. Where that ID is for you is just an ID, but the idea for the operator is it knows about that ID. So think of the SAP ID similar to that concept. And as you will see here, the idea of the SAP ID, or we call it peer SAP ID, because we want to inform or infer that this is from the peer perspective. We introduced this one into the model. We think this is addressing the question that was raised, but we are still open to the different interpretation or different question if there is something. And I realize that Adrian is going to address that one, and we can take question most likely at the end of the session. So this is one of the items that we want to find out what's the best way to do it, and hopefully there are very good feedback at the end of the session. Now we can go through the 4 open issues that we talked at the beginning. If you go to the next slide.
I see Adrian's in queue. I don't know if you want to do it now or at the end.
I can take the question right now. It's okay.
Hi, it's Adrian. Yeah, I'm seeing this SAP stuff for the first time in this document, and I'm struggling to understand what the what this is doing in the Yang service model that is describing the service as provided to the customer. So in this case, when the SDP is out in the CE, the customer does not care what's going on inside the SDP.
No, definitely there are some instances. There are lots of attribute optional. So if this is the case, if you are a customer and you really don't care about that, so in that case, you most likely don't need to specify that. But if you care, and there is an example, maybe Ryan can comment on that one. If you care about that one, if you want to have some the information from the core of the network, so this SAP ID is helping from that. So it's obviously optional. So if you don't want to specify it, you are feel free not to specify that one.
Maybe I should phrase it slightly more strongly. The customer must not care what is going on inside the provider's network.
I leave that answer to Ryan because he's the customer and he did that most likely. In his use case, he cares about that one. So I don't know if you want to answer it right now, Ryan, or yes, please. Yeah, we can do. We have 10 minutes, and
we're running ahead. So if we have good discussion on a working group document, time well spent.
Thanks for the question, Adrian. So it's meant to be a layer of abstraction we don't have between the SDP and the attachment circuit. The attachment circuit, to me, naturally latches to more physical attributes that I may want to reveal the state of in my network slice. But when it comes to points in the network that I want to identify as places you can put virtual functions, like if you're building a 5G network and you want to position your UPF in certain places, a SAP can be very useful in a customer wanting to distinguish between where can I put these when I have the ability to do so, where they're fluid. And if the SAP had more attributes than what we started with here, so I'm hoping we could dig into that in further revisions. You could decide where you wish to place your SDP for a certain connectivity path based on the constraints that SAP to SAP connections can offer you. So it's a layer of abstraction we're missing.
Before you leave the mic, can you say your full name for the record?
My apologies, Ryan Hoffman from TELUS.
You will see it in the presentation.
It's fine, he still needs to say it.
So I think Ryan and I are going to sit down sometime with a piece of paper and try and draw this, because what I heard him just say was he wants to be able to flexibly place his SDPs to support functions in the network. And I'm not seeing a difference in that case between a SAP and an SDP, because in that case, the SDP is not inside the CE, the SDP is at the edge of the provider network. But we need to draw this.
Definitely bring all the authors to this discussion as well. Just want to make sure that we capture everything. So just to make sure we went through this one at least for 2 or 3 sessions. There was pros and cons, exactly as Adrian mentioned. Do we need it at all? SAP is just mentioned in the framework in 1 sentence, and whether or not we have to do it. And from that aspect, definitely we are open to any suggestion, and we want to get the idea of this one from the different vantage point.
Edward is in the queue.
Please.
Yes, I have one general question. Do you believe that the current YANG model which you defined is suitable for assurance, or okay, it maybe needs to be augmented by some additional parameters? Maybe for assurance you need something else, but do you believe it's in principle suitable for assurance, especially in so complicated things like closed loop control and intent-based assurance, etc.? Or you believe it should be something different? The YANG model for assurance would be completely not related to your current YANG model?
Just rephrase your question, just to make sure I understand. You're asking about the IETF network slice assurance.
Yeah, no. Assurance in general, because what you have now is definitely for IETF network slice, right? And sooner or later, assurance, especially in closed loop control, in intent-based model, assurance will be needed sooner or later, right? And there are 2 choices. One choice is to try to augment your current YANG model. Another choice is develop completely different, completely new YANG model, which will be no correlation to the current one. Do you believe the assurance is for this model, or it's something completely not related?
assurance by itself, we talk about it for last, I don't know, at least 1 year or more than that. Obviously, it's related to that. I'm encouraging you to take a look at the model, at least from the model perspective. Assurance is very important. We address that one based on the model. And when you talk about orchestration or anything, it's above that model per se. The concept is completely valid, but it's not directly related to this one. So if you need if you want, we can have side discussion on that one. I'm more than happy to go through what your thought is and if there is anything that needed. This is just an NBI. I just want to make sure that we are, differentiating between various ideas versus NBI, and we can have side discussion on that.
Okay.
We'll give you a little extra time because we were running early, so don't feel hard on that 6 minutes. Kariti has a question.
Hi, Kiriti Kampala. So I'm halfway with where Adrian is, but not all the way there. One thing I would suggest is instead of numbering the SAPs, SAP1, SAP2, SAP1 again, and the idea being that, oh, I know that SAPs are on different devices, you should just say, these are my SAPs 1 through N, whatever N is, and the correspondence between an SAP and a PE should be opaque. So, I mean, the way I look at it in the picture, I see SAP1 multiple times and I infer that there are multiple PEs. That should be a black box.
Sure, I understand what you're trying to say, but at least this picture is trying to convey the idea of the SAP explicitly. But you definitely, in that case, I mentioned at the beginning, IETF network is a black box. Yeah. And this is the idea. Just think about that we don't know anything about internally. Operator doesn't want to expose that one to CU1 and CU2. Yeah. And that is a correct statement. If you want to be part of the discussion, more than happy to take you as well. And let's go through it since everybody is here. Just go through it.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. So for the rest of the presentation, we go through some of the updates for the 4 issues that I mentioned. If you go to next slide, please. So a custom topology. This is discussed in the previous Yang IETF 114. And the idea was, if I want from the northbound interface, I want to introduce some specific topology that I want to realize my IETF network slice. And is it possible to do it? So this was the question that we tried to address. And the idea was, can we use the T topology model? So there are some potentially problem with that. And there is some another another draft, the OTN slicing, which is more or less using our model as a base. So the whole question is whether or not T topology is appropriate for this one. So the one idea of a T topology is technology specific, is a TE network. And the whole idea of the northbound is agnostic where the concept that we have. So from that aspect, it seems that the TE topology might not be good enough for this application that we have. It's good for VN and ACTN because they talk about the T topology. And this is one thing that we want to also discuss, whether or not the way that we have it is enough. Is there any other topology we can use? And since we might have time, Pavan wants to address something here. And you wanted to be in the model in IETF 114, so go ahead, please.
Pavan Bira, Juniper Networks. There was a document that was presented a few IETFs back. I think Italo was the author on that, where there was an attempt to make RFC 8795 be classified as a T-aware topology as opposed to being just a T topology. So it brings in a lot of things that some of the base topology models do not have, things like information sources and the idea of connectivity matrices. Everything is there in 8795. You could use it for networks where for defining topologies that do not have any T attributes, it would still work. So if you look at it as a T-aware topology, it just fits in.
So it's good news. If what I understand from your comment is that could be technology agnostic that we can use when you don't specify the T specific attribute of the model.
That's my
If this
personal
is the
opinion,
case,
but
we can use
we would still need some working discussion on that. The way I see it, 8795 fits the bill.
Okay, if this is the case, we're more than happy to take that one. Again, we are open to any suggestion. If there is any question or any comment on that one, I'm more than happy to take it. The second issue that we cover, if you go to the next slide, is the question about whether or not we need connection group for connectivity construct. So just refresh our memory. In network slice framework, they talk about connectivity construct. Connectivity construct has some characteristic. One of them in a specific is SLO, SLE. And the whole idea is we want to have an IETF network slice which has multiple connection or connectivity construct, and potentially the SLO and SLE of those constructs are different. So in other words, you can have, for example, an IETF network slice with 10 connections, 4 of them have a specific SLO, 6 of them have another. To realize that, although connection group is not explicitly mentioned in framework, for us to realize that concept, we introduce connectivity connection group. So basically, connection group has bunch of connection with a specific SLO and SLE, and a network slice can have multiple of that. So this was the idea that if you have only a single SLO, SLE, it seems that connection group might not be needed, because we introduced that one to have multiple SLO, SLE. But we think that with the model that we have, it's very clean design, although in some cases it's overkill, you don't need that. But having that one is giving us very good design concept that each time that you want to create a construct, you create group first, you specify the SLO and SLE, and after that, you do the add connectivity construct to that one. I realize Joel is in the line, and we can take questions right now.
Joel Halpern from Ericsson. I appreciate that this model may be cleaner from a Yang perspective, but it strikes me that having one set of descriptions that we use in the framework and then use in other drafts that build from the framework, and a different set of descriptions of the same concepts using different words and different terminology in the Yang model is going to make things very hard for folks who haven't lived through the description of, well, this is actually the same thing as that. So I think it is a bad idea, even if the modeling is slightly simpler by doing so.
Just want to make sure, and before going, I never mentioned whatever you just said. I just said that the connection group is the new thing that is introduced here. Everything else is exactly as defined in network slice framework. All the terminology, all the thing, attributes, everything is already there. I'm not sure.
If the connection group is that useful, then we should put it into the framework. If it's not, then we shouldn't use it in the Yang.
Fair enough. Any other question, comments? I don't know how much time I have. I don't see the timer, but in a few minutes I will be.
You have a lot more.
Okay, so we can go to...
Yeah, 12-minute buffer.
Okay. Yeah, we had extra time. This is our last working group document, so it should be the priority.
Oh, okay, so perfect. So the third issue that we want to cover, or we had discussed this one actually at IETF114, and there wasn't any progress. If you look at the left-hand side, the issue is that to be technology agnostic, we introduce, as you see, the red protocol and OPEC. We introduce some attribute which is basically value and identity. So we didn't want to have any specific protocol-related attributes. We try to go with the OPEC. We just specify an attribute and a value for that. So this is good from the modeling perspective and from the technology agnostic perspective. But if you look at the right-hand side, this might bring some interoperability issues. And the question here is how we can solve that one. We need some advice from the young doctors to give us some advice how to do it. And again, we are open to that question. I think this was raised by Italo, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe you can add some comment here.
Yes, thank you, Reza. Yes, my first question is why do you need such a type of definition versus going as usually young when you have defined all the leaves with their types? Because I'm not clear understanding what is the problem you are trying to solve. Because in other models, what you do, you'd say, okay, you say, these are the attributes that I need to configure to get this configuration. And for every attribute, you say what is the type, the range, the pattern, and all this stuff. By doing this opaque way, I don't understand. Okay, I see all the problem with interoperability because then you require some offline negotiation, which where you have to do exactly the same with what you put in Yang. What is the name of the attribute? What is the type, the range, and all this stuff. So why you don't do that in Yang? What is the problem you are trying to solve? Which is difficult for me to understand.
I give my answer, but Drew and Bo, you also feel free to provide your answer. As you see here on the SDP side, for the protocol, one way is to specify all the protocol that you want to support, BGP, static, OSI. But we didn't want to go that way. From that way, you will see the technology. So
you don't want to put IP in the Yang model, but then in the Yang instance, you have to write IP, and the controller needs to be IP aware. You cannot configure an IP protocol without being IP technology specific. So why do we need a model which appears to be technology agnostic when the real implementation of that model will definitely be technology specific, because the value that you can write there are technology specific attribute. You have to write it down IP, you have to write it down IP address, you have to write down a BGP or neighbor address. All this information, if you are not an IP expert or a BGP expert, you don't understand anyhow. So you have to be, that interface, that configuration is definitely technology specific.
But sometimes it's not even IP. If it's optical
for
OTN slicing, yes, you have to add all this. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, thanks, Italo. I think this is not something that we haven't done before. Like if you look at RFC 8776 example, we have multiple metric types. We decided that we want to allow the Yang model not to be changed every time we add a new metric type. And the same thing is we wanted to borrow here, that let's define the NBI, let's use the identity concept so that all we have to do is define a new identity, which is not going to change into more augmentation of the model. It's going to be simpler, and provided if all of these things are strings anyway. I totally understand that we are not checking it in the Yang model now. We have to implement that logic of checking somewhere else, but at least the Yang modeling would be simpler. And I know that we have a different point of view there, and that's why we want to arbiter from maybe Yang doctors or something, where our question is, if we have a Yang model that we would want to be technology agnostic, not follow the typical approach of defining a base model and then augmenting IP, optical, microwave, all the things that we have done in the past. If you want to define a single model which remains technology agnostic and apply this logic, how do we find a good middle ground? That's where we are struggling and we are discussing. We are still open to all the suggestions from experts.
Thank you.
Yes, my point is that you move all the Yang syntax somewhere else. So at the end of the day, the implementations have to agree on this exactly the same information that you put in the Yang model.
But what is your suggestion, Italo?
Go Yang model.
Just put everything there?
Yes. Maybe we can split, like we did for T topology, between a generic model, and then you have for every technology specific, you have an augmentation where you put the attributes. And that will let also the user know if you support IP, you advertise the IP augmentation. If you don't support IP, you don't advertise the IP augmentation. So the user will know what type of information he can configure and we cannot configure. Otherwise, again, you can do that. You just have to do it offline, and you have to reinvent, do another mechanism that for which I see Yang is trying to solve this problem by saying that with the Yang library, all this stuff is going to give all the information that you need. If we don't use those mechanisms, we come up with a new mechanism which do exactly the same, and I don't understand why.
Is this the first time that we are doing it at IETF, or there are some examples that we can borrow? You mentioned there are some examples somewhere else. IETF115-TEAS-20221108-1300.
Yeah, so for instance, in that metric type, all the values are not of the same type. Like sometimes we use decimal, sometimes fraction, but we have decided that we are going to just use UN64, and it is the job of the implementer to look at the metric type and then decide what the value should be and check. Similarly, our idea was that when we have a particular identity, we can say what is the type we are expecting when this identity is used. For instance, if the identity is IP, we can say the format in string. In the Yang description you are writing it, you are not writing it using the Yang must statement or the string this thing. So I think it is still possible, but yeah, I think we are not converging on this, so we do need external help.
And we take another question from Iowa. He's the author of OTN slicing, so I'm sure he's going to talk about that.
Iowa from FutureWay. Just a quick comments on the opaque attributes. So basically, with the opaque attributes, we are not going to be able to validate the value with the Yang schema, right? And that's one thing. And the second thing is, if there are a little complex attributes that's a little beyond a simple value, it's difficult to capture that with a simple list.
Yeah. So this is exactly the reason that we are raising it. So there is pros and cons on each way. So what is the middle point and what is the best way to handle it? Thank you. Lou?
It sounds to me that it might be good to bring in an early Yang doctor review and comments to help with this.
We already told Kevin about it.
Yeah, so my experience is that in general, the models we're developing, we're trying hard to move away from putting restrictions in descriptions and to move towards allowing automated validation, as I was just talking about. And so it would go against sort of where you're headed and where you have to have some other context to know the types. To me, it sounds like you're going to do some really hard validation of a lot of when statements to say, you know, when we're set to this type, that UN64 has these allowed values. And that seems like a lot more complexity than just having a choice statement. And I think you'll get that from getting a Yang doctor to really work with you. And we'll deal with it a little differently. But this, there are cases where we've done augmentation and to allow for multiple technologies. And I'm not sure why not to just follow one of those patterns.
You can do that again for us either, or it should be fine, but just want to make sure that everybody has in agreement on that. We take another question, Oscar.
Hi, this is Oscar Gonzalez from Telefonica. As author of L3NM, we faced there the problem on the CP interface on do we put here everything that we need in a specific way or not? And we ended up, okay, this need to be used. So we decided to put, for example, if you have the example of the BGP, it's a BGP peering that you need to put. So we put the structure with the, let's say, minimum set of things that need to be, let's say, agreed between the customer and the network. And it was not just a collection of values that we consult. So sometimes you need to put subtrees there. So this is why just having a collection of opaque values might not fit all the cases. So I think it would be better to have a placeholder and maybe to have just, okay, BGP specific peering here. You can have it. It has a complex structure, but it's a complete, well-defined, and you can exchange it with the customer. And you don't have anything left out. Otherwise, you might have trouble.
Yeah, okay. Valid point.
My personal view.
And now we're going to start taking time from other people. So
yeah, 25 seconds.
It's okay. I mean, as a working group document, again, this has priority, but you're taking time from others.
Just a tiny comment. I think, what has happened is over time, initially when we were proposing IETF network slicing, there was this whole thing about we already have other service model. There are different realization technique, and we wanted at that time the requirement on top. Oh, sorry. What did I do?
Real
close.
Just throw it on the floor, finish your comment, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah. Close. So, was not trying to attend another working group, don't worry. So what I was saying was at that time, the requirement was that we wanted to keep this model as much technology agnostic as possible. That was a very explicit requirement from the top, that we didn't want to add too many details about L3SM, L2SM, how it is realized. So we really were thinking of that. And I have seen now that things have changed a little bit. People do realize that this model is anyway needed, irrespective of this. So if we want to get more feedback, and this was very useful, and if the general mood of the working group is that we should get out of this opaque way, and this is the base IETF network slice, and then you need to add more L2 stuff, okay, go and augment with L2 characteristics, with L3 characteristics, with BGP, with IP, with OTN. If that's the direction that we are going, I think it would be good to be more explicit, and then we can take that direction.
And to close up the discussion, issue 4 is very...
you do want issue 4. Okay.
Issue 4 is the simple IP address related. So we just changed something to be very specific to prefix and the IP address. This is a minor issue. I just put it there for the completeness because I specified that we have 4 issues. And last slide is, if there is any other comments, more than welcome to take them. And I think we are ready for the last call, the working group last call. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Luis?
We are now moving on to the individual draft section. This is another of those network slice instantiation documents. We do have a fair number already, so we would like to request our various authors to find opportunities where you can merge with existing documents where are possible.
Okay, okay.
And that's a general comment, not just on yours.
Yeah. Okay, okay. Thank you. So I will present this on behalf of my co-authors. So next slide, please. So as a reminder, the context of what motivated this draft was that we have a number of artifacts to play with. On one hand, we have the IETF network slice services with the requirements, network slice framework, and attributes and functionalities or procedures. So we have on one hand all the network slice work. On the other hand, we have all the IETF network automation work regarding service models, network models, TE models, and the service mapping to these TE models, and also the ACLs. So with these artifacts, with these tools, together with existing architectures like ACTN or the service model, the draft about the explanation of service models, we figured out how to collect all this work and trying to do a way of how to use or how to play with the network slice models and the service and network models in such a way that we could define a straightforward way of using all of them. Next, please. So we consider also potential architectures. This was a kind of brainstorming exercise to understand how we could play with the fact of having the functionality of IETF network slice controller either as part of an end-to-end orchestrator or as a standalone element or a part of a network controller. So these are ideas that are now reflected in the draft, and probably we need to work a bit more on that. They make sense or not, to what extent they make sense. Well, at least by now we are considering this, so we will have different ways of realizing the IETF network slice controller in an overall architecture in a service provider side. So this was a reminder as well. So next, please. So the updates in this version, well, we updated for IETF in Philadelphia and also for this other IETF. So for version 04, we corrected a number of, we corrected figure 5 that was essentially what could be the relationship between the IETF network slice model, the NBI YANG, with respect to the service model and the network model. So we clarify some point in the figure that was not so clear. We also added the description of how to map the parameters of the network, the NBI with respect to the layer 3 SM or the layer 2 SM. So trying to reconcile, let's say, what could be the attributes in the different models and see what could be missing or how they could match. We move also from the annex the detailed relationship of this model, the NBI with respect to the service model, and we fixed a number of typos that were there in that version. also updating the references in some cases from previously adopted drafts to actual RFCs. For this IETF, we also have work in the general alignment with respect to the terminology in the framework document. There was some mismatching. And also we updated references and we refined the text in some points. So next, please. Regarding what I was mentioned before, the clarification or the correction in the figures, so was a little bit confused in the previous version. So what we are proposing here is that we could have probably two paths to follow, either to translate the IETF network slice service model to a service model, like either layer 2 or layer 3. Or alternatively, we could take the IETF network slice service model and translate it to a network model. So both paths seems for us feasible. There could be probably different cases where we could follow one or the other, and the idea is to document both of them, and yeah, and essentially that. So next, please. We also added, so this is let's say a zoom on the kind of relationship with the parameters that I was commenting before. So taking on one hand the parameters that are being considered in the MBI YAM model and compare them with the parameters that are being defined either in the layer 3 service model and layer 2 service model. So trying to match them and to figure out what could be missing and what could be the parts that could be necessary to complete in the MBI YAM model in order to have a straightforward of translating from one model to the other. This has been done for the service model. It's yet pending to be done for the network model. So that would be some of the to-dos for the next version. So next slide, please. So our next steps, we will work on version 06. The idea is to review the architectural models that I presented at the beginning, so to understand if all of them make sense or not, or if there is something missing. So probably we could be necessary to clean up a little bit the different options. These were just for illustrating, let's say, the possibilities, and with that, having an idea what could be the kind of translations that we could require. Also, potentially could be the case that we could consider that the service is being requested by a service model and then the realization is done through a network slice. And this could be maybe the case of using OTN slicing. So having a layer 3 service model that is later on somehow entirely or partially being realized by OTN slicing. So we will document this as well. We need to complement and complete the relationship between the MBI YAM model and the layer 3 and layer 2 network models. And yeah, we will keep working on detailing the different implementation options and the operational considerations. So as final statements, the idea would be to collect feedback from all of you. And yeah, we would like to request adoption or having at least in the horizon the adoption of this document, maybe targeting next IETF or this IETF if the chairs think that it's convenient. And that's all. Thank you.
I think the addressing Pavan's comment would be very good. Look at the other instantiation documents, see where you can combine. I think that would be beneficial before trying to adopt.
Okay.
Yeah, we can revisit this before the next meeting. Okay.
Now you're also presenting next.
Yes. So I will also present this other draft, which is about the network slice controller structure, some ideas about what could be a functional structure of the network slice controller, and how the different data models could fit to these different functional capabilities. I will present on behalf of my co-authors as well. So next, please. Yeah, the idea, just again, as a reminder, so we are defining the network slice controller in the framework document as the central piece in order to take, let's say, the expression of the network slice intent and translate it to the realization of the network slice, interacting with different controllers underneath. So from that idea, we departed and the authors, the co-authors of the initial, let's say, models, we were working together and trying to figure out what could be the functional behavior that we could expect in the internal of a network slice controller. And from that discussion, we realized, or we considered that there could be two main functions, what we call network slice mapper and what we call network slice realizer. The mapper would be essentially the functional component that processes the customer request coming from the MBI model, digest such a request and put that slice request in the context of all the rest of slices that are in the provider side, right? And then we have the realizer that would be the functional component that essentially associate the technology related or technology specific aspects and then interact with the network controllers underneath for the realization of the slice. In the figure that you can see in the central part of the picture, we identify like three kind of reference points, A, B, and C, and we start to do the mapping of the existing models in each of these parts. So in the reference point A, essentially we consider that we will have the customer view for the network slice request. So essentially would correspond to the MBIM model that was presented by Reza a few minutes ago. In the reference point B, we could have a kind of provider view, including much more detail and seeing how this slice request could be, could coexist with other slices and so also having a more detailed view of the network slice request. And we could have a technology agnostic resource view that would correspond to the draft LEUTs transport network slice YANG, or alternatively, some technology-specific augmentation as could be the document for OTN slicing, the CCAM YANG OTN slicing. And finally, on the reference point C, we expect to have there the models per network controller. Essentially, we would play with the models that we have just commented in the presentation before, that what is being documented in draft Bargil-TEAS network slice instantiation. So layer 3, layer 2, service model, and network models, essentially. Next slide, please. So the updates have been the following. In version 02, we added reference, we referenced to additional models, like in the case of OTN. In the version from July 03, we started adding more details, more functional details on the mapper and realizer. So we added for the mapper all the relationship with the concept of NRP that was defined or it was included in the framework document. So the mapper would be in charge of the generation of the NRPs, the mapping of the slices to the NRPs, and the aggregation of performance information from the distinct NRPs. So somehow we try to make consistent with what is done which is described in the framework document. And for the realizer, we were considering that the realizer would be the one in charge of generating the filter topologies, disposing the telemetry information from those filter topologies, and so again, being consistent with what is being described in the framework document. We also added reference to additional models, like the IETF network slice instantiation, the draft Bargil that I presented before, and we included some security considerations as well. And finally, for October, for this IETF, we have working in a general alignment with the terminology of the framework document that is evolving along the time. So we essentially clean up the document and polishing in that respect, also refining a little bit the text. So next, please.
You also have a question?
Oh, yeah, Joel, please.
Joel Halpern from Ericsson. I'm a little concerned by something on your previous slide, and this may have been in earlier drafts and I just didn't realize it. I have no problem with the conceptual notion of mappers and realizers. A perfectly reasonable descriptive technique. But when you start talking about standardizing a model for how those two are related and requiring by a standard that that's what's exposed, we're constraining the implementation of the network slice controller. We usually try to avoid constraining implementation, and these two are two components within the same implementation. So I find it a little odd to have a model in there for the relationship between the mapper and the realizer. Have you thought about this conflict?
Yep. I understand your point. The idea that we had in mind was essentially to understand how to use the different models, what could be the relationship. So I think that it's necessary to have a kind of roadmap, how to use them and how they are related. I understand your point that maybe going farther than that and trying to standardize in a fixed manner, that would be the only way, could be hard. It could be probably should be open to implementation, but somehow with the different tools that we have, the different artifacts, we feel the need of having a kind of guidance how they could be related in such a way that we can understand, let's say, all the relationship among them.
We just need to be a little careful here.
Joel, you might want to take a look at the document. This is like informational. It's not prescriptive.
Well, that's why, I mean, to the degree that it's a descriptive informational thing, that's fine. But his description of what it was a specific explicit exposed model, and that's what caused me to react.
Maybe we can add some sentence in trying to explicitly say that this is just a case or an example of how it could be done. Maybe.
It's more to Joel than to you. The data modeling work fundamentally describes what can be implemented, right? The base model should include what we are planning to use. Yang allows augmentation to what's potentially going to be used that's not included today. It cannot be anything to everybody, right? We need to limit the scope and what's going to be implemented. That's the goal, really.
Okay. So as next steps, the idea, again, to collect feedback and comments from the working group as the one that we have received, and we would like to, once we have this structure, to use this as a reference structure for potential network slice controller architectures. Maybe a first try could be to try to play with the ACTN, which is in the draft ITS, this applicability ACTN slicing, to see how the mapper realizer could fit more or less that architecture. This is an idea. And yeah, we think that we could call for adoption for the document and prepare a new version, not for 1.15, but 1.16. So,
okay. So we would like to sort of gauge the interest in the room on this document. Again, it's the informational document that was just presented. Is there interest in adopting this? So raise your hands for yes, don't for no, and if you're not sure or not interested, don't respond. And we'll give this about 30 seconds and then read out our conclusion from the poll.
While you're waiting,
yeah, please.
Hi, this is Dhruv. It's just that the boundary between these two documents that you presented is not very clear to me. I do understand that in one we are focusing on mapper and realizer as an abstract concept, and maybe in the second one you are saying, let's take L3 VPN and L3 SMN service and realize this. But I feel like they go sort of hand in hand. This separation is very arbitrary to me.
Yeah. So how this second document is a kind of sum of the internals of the network address controller. In the first one, essentially we are talking about the boundaries of the network address controller. As you said, probably, yeah, we divide it in that way. Probably could be one single document for everything. Not sure, but one is focusing on the functionality of the network address controller. The other one on how to play with the models in the boundaries. That is the rationale, at least.
So I think we've gotten a pretty good showing of the feeling of the people in the room, both physical and virtual. We have about almost a third, basically a third of the people responding, and almost all of them positive. So I think there's definitely interest in the work. There's support for it. We'll talk about whether we do an adoption call or wait for the next meeting. And we as the chairs.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to the last one of this session.
Hi, my name is Paul, and I'll be presenting this NRPL model and also the like the status that this NRP young model and also NRP policy model, like from other NRP policy young. So next slide, please. So some background here, because a while ago, Luis just mentioned about that how that when.
Oh, excuse me. Please use the microphone.
Just hold it.
So when it comes to, because slice framework define the three basic connectivity, point-to-point, point-to-multipoint, and any-to-any that mesh connectivity. When it comes to the mapping to the resources, then like Luis just mentioned, there could be some direct way that directly map to the underlay network resources, like he mentioned in their in his two drafts. That could be like T path or some other resources. But here in our NRP Young model, we are trying to focus on how to map any-to-any connectivity construct, how that can be mapped to the underlay network resources. Along with that, the NS framework defined that the connectivity should meet that SLO and SLE requirements. SSE requirements define that the isolation expectation. So that's the reason why like two NRP can be created to like each NRP has its own dedicated resources per that NRP. And then each any-to-any connectivity can map to that particular NRP. So why we think this NRP young model is necessary, because for NRP, then how does NS network slice controller understand that that underlay resources can support any-to-any connectivity with like shortest path forwarding. So because framework defined that NRP policy has the basic topology and resources components, but to support any-to-any connectivity, we still need more other components like the control plane to understand whether this NRP can support NRP-aware routing here. So that's the reason why we think this NRP model is necessary. So next slide, please. Oh, then I give that some summary on these updates. Like I just mentioned, we had some discussion with NRP policy colleagues, and we had bi-weekly meeting talking about how to converge these two young models. And based on the discussion, we had some updates on the first is about the control plane, that we make it that clear that this NRP model needs to support NRP-aware routing. And we also add a new flag to mark, because NRP model to support this NRP-aware routing, that the NRP topology model, NRP topology is quite consistent, needs to be consistent with the routing needs to be consistent with the topology. And another update is about that how to show the underlay topology with the NRP resources dedicated to that topology links. So that's the other part that we are update. So next slide, please. Here I want to give the some merging discussion status. Like we have the discussion with NRP policy, and we think most of the NRP components, we have more understanding about this, and we think there are 5 major components of this NRP Young modeling. The first I just mentioned already, like defined in the NRP in the slice framework, and so I think the 2 NRP related Young model addressed each from this perspective. Like in our model, we mostly focus on how to support NRP aware routing to support any-to-any connectivity. The other, another NRP policy model try to like define a TEAS aware NRP policy model. So that's a major difference. I gave the like 4 points that we are working on that we try to like accommodate in the 2 different options here. And the black points that we show that we both agree that the resource reservation is something we need. We all need it. But the other 4, we are talking about it, how to converge these 2. And I think currently we are doing the first step, how to dealing with the NRP instantiation. But we also think there are NRP monitoring and also NRP device model is also necessary. But we will get to that after we like converge on that NRP instance model. So, and this is my summary from my understanding from the biweekly discussion. If there's another thing that you, I can like let the colleagues from NRP policy can add some more on this.
Pawan Biram, Juniper Networks. I'm one of the co-authors on the NRP policy document. Like Bo said, we have been having regular sync-ups on trying to merge the 2 documents. I mean, I would like to think that we have made a great deal of progress in at least putting together a common set of components that make up what we call NRP policy. There's still some work to be done. I think we are very close, but not there yet. I would suggest having a series of open bi-weekly meetings over the next few weeks and try and close on them and have something ready for adoption before the next meeting. Thanks for the update, though.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great to see the progress. You know, as we asked in the previous document, bringing together the different perspectives into a consolidated document just helps us all progress the work. So thank you very much. Really appreciate the, I know it can be challenging to bring together the different perspectives, but that's what we need to do here. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And with that, we're actually going to end, what is that, 1 minute 40 seconds early. And we're going to rejoin here in half an hour, 31 minutes. And thank you all for a great session. Look forward to the next one.